My stepson fixed the broken car, and he did this unbelievable thing that surprised me. Sometimes, life leads you to crossroads where even the most predictable choices can bring the most unforeseen outcomes. Choices that, by all logic, should be forbidden, yet still cling to the edges of your mind. This story I'm about to tell you. Well, it was one of those choices. I've always been a practical woman, one who lived by clear rules, one who'd lived through disappointments, heartache, and the comfortable familiarity that time can wrap around your life like a blanket. But sometimes, even in your later years, life doesn't settle as you expect. Instead, it stirs. And it was on one of those stirring days while stranded on the side of an empty road with a broken-down car that I felt something reawaken inside of me. Something dangerous, something alive. The memory has since become a delicate ache. A longing I never intended to revisit. But it's here, with me now, in this story I am about to share. A story of what happens when the choices we try to forget slip back to the surface, bringing with them the weight of all we once dared to feel. It was a late afternoon in early autumn, and the sun was beginning to cast its gentle light over the countryside. I had decided to take the long way home from the small-town market, savoring the quiet drive and the faint smell of fallen leaves drifting through the air. My husband, Gerald, was away on a business trip, as he often was, and I enjoyed the rare moments when the house felt like my own. We'd been married for nearly 8 years, and while our lives had settled comfortably, there was a sense of distance that seemed to grow each year, a slow but steady erosion of connection. As I drove along the winding road, a strange sound came from the engine, a low rumbling that grew louder with each mile. I tried to ignore it, hoping it would pass, but after a few minutes, the car shuddered to a halt, smoke rising from under the hood. I sighed, stepping out and looking around. There was no one in sight, no other car on the road, and only the empty fields stretching into the distance. I reached for my phone, only to remember Gerald had taken our other car in for servicing, which had left me without any service on this drive. I knew Gerald was hours away, and calling him would only lead to a lengthy, frustrating wait. Instead, I dialed Jared, my stepson, knowing he lived not far from where I was and worked as a mechanic. I hesitated, the small pang of nervousness catching me off guard, but I brushed it off. This was Jared, after all, the young man who had entered my life like a flash of vitality years ago, and who I still found myself watching with a mix of affection and, something I never allowed myself to fully name. Within 20 minutes, I heard the hum of Jared's pickup as he pulled up behind my car. He hopped out, his expression warm and easy, and his blue work shirt slightly rumpled from what looked like a long day in the garage. "Mrs. Easton," he greeted with a slight grin, the familiar glint of humor in his eyes. "What happened here? Got yourself into a bit of car trouble?" I felt a laugh escape me despite myself. "Vivian, please," I replied, trying to sound unaffected as I tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "And yes, it seems I've managed to break down in the middle of nowhere. I'm sorry to pull you away from work." He waved a hand dismissively, stepping forward to take a look under the hood. "This is what I do best," he said with a reassuring smile, lifting the hood with practiced ease. "Besides, it's not often I get called out for an emergency rescue by my stepmother." I watched as he worked, his hands moving deftly, his focus unwavering. There was a kind of natural grace to him, a quiet confidence that had only grown in the years I'd known him. Gerald and I had married when Jared was still in college, and at the time I'd thought of him as little more than a polite young man, someone I'd see only occasionally. But over the years, I'd watched him grow into himself, and though I never said it aloud, I found myself admiring him, feeling a strange sense of pride in his accomplishments and independence. As he examined the engine, he occasionally glanced back at me, offering updates in that relaxed tone of his. "Looks like a coolant leak," he said at one point, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's nothing too serious, but I'll need to tow it back to the shop. I can have it fixed by tomorrow." "That's a relief," I replied, feeling a sense of calm settle over me. "Thank you, Jared. I don't know what I'd do without you." He smiled, and for a moment there was a flicker of something in his gaze, something that felt familiar but still distant, a quiet intensity that seemed to reach beyond the easy warmth of his usual demeanor. It was a look that made my breath catch, a look that lingered, just a moment too long. He cleared his throat, glancing away as he adjusted his grip on the rag. "Tell you what," he said after a pause, his voice casual. "Why don't you come by the garage? I'll drive you home after I take care of this." I hesitated, the thought of sitting in his truck, of spending just a little longer in his presence, sending a small thrill through me that I couldn't quite suppress. "If it's not too much trouble," I said, keeping my tone light. "It's no trouble at all," he replied, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Let's get this car sorted, and then I'll get you home safe." The following afternoon, I found myself at Jared's garage, the scent of oil and metal filling the air as I stepped inside. He was at work on my car, his movements focused and precise as he tightened bolts, checked levels, and made adjustments with a practiced hand. I watched from the doorway, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and something deeper, a sense of admiration I hadn't felt in years. He glanced up as I approached, his expression softening as he set down his tools. "There you are," he greeted, wiping his hands on his jeans. "The car's nearly done. You'll be back on the road in no time." "Thank you, Jared," I said, a smile tugging at my lips. "I didn't mean for you to put in so much work." He shrugged, his eyes meeting mine with that familiar warmth. "Your family, Vivian. It's the least I can do." Family. The word lingered in the air, a reminder of the boundaries that surrounded us, the lines that should never be crossed. But as he looked at me, there was a flicker of something else in his gaze, a hint of vulnerability that made my heart race. I found myself stepping closer, drawn to the quiet strength in his presence, the warmth that radiated from him like a steady flame. We spoke for a while, our conversation drifting from one topic to another, and I found myself sharing stories I hadn't told anyone in years, memories from my youth, dreams I'd once had, the pieces of myself I'd set aside over time. And he listened, his attention unwavering, his gaze steady as he took in every word. There was an openness to him, a kindness that seemed to reach beyond the usual pleasantries. It was as though he saw me, not just as his stepmother, not just as Gerald's wife, but as a person, a woman with her own desires and regrets. As the afternoon wore on, the sky grew dark, heavy clouds gathering as the first drops of rain began to fall. I glanced at the door, noting the storm that had begun to brew outside, and Jared followed my gaze, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Looks like we're in for a bit of weather," he said, his voice soft. I nodded, feeling the tension between us deepen, the silence stretching as the rain began to drum against the roof. In that moment, there was no one else, no past, no future. Only the two of us, caught in a quiet storm that seemed to mirror the one raging outside. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to brush a stray lock of hair from my face, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. His touch was gentle, his fingers warm against my skin, and I found myself leaning into him, drawn by a force I couldn't name. The boundaries between us began to blur, the lines we had once respected fading into nothingness as he leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that was both tender and filled with a longing that had been building for years. The next few weeks passed in a blur of familiar routines and lingering memories that seemed to follow me around the house like a shadow. Gerald returned from his trip, his usual composed self, and life fell back into its comfortable rhythms. But even as I went through the motions, there was a shift, a subtle thrill that had been awakened within me that I couldn't quite ignore. I found myself inventing small excuses to see Jared. The car, though running perfectly after his last repair, suddenly seemed to need a checkup, and I found myself driving over to his garage at odd hours, my heart fluttering each time I saw his truck parked out front. He would greet me with that warm, easy smile, his voice as calm as ever, but there was an intensity in his gaze, a shared understanding that made each interaction feel like more than just small talk. One afternoon, I stopped by under the pretense of needing advice on how to handle a minor repair myself. It was a flimsy excuse, but he seemed to understand, his eyes meeting mine with a faint, knowing smile as he showed me the basics of car maintenance. I watched as he demonstrated how to check the oil, his hands steady and sure, the muscles in his forearms flexing as he worked. There was a confidence in his movements that captivated me, a quiet strength that seemed to anchor me in ways I hadn't felt in years. At one point, he turned to hand me the wrench, his fingers brushing against mine, and I felt a spark, a brief, electric connection that sent a thrill through me, leaving me breathless. He hesitated, his gaze meeting mine, and for a moment the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of us, standing in the quiet intimacy of the garage. "Vivian," he said softly, his voice a low murmur that seemed to fill the space between us. But he didn't finish. Instead, he took a step back, his expression conflicted, as though he were fighting some inner battle. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the same tension that had been building between us since that afternoon by the roadside. "Thank you, Jared," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper, "for everything." He nodded, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before he turned away, his hands busy with tools that no longer required his attention. As I left, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and guilt, a sense of having crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. One evening, about a week later, a storm rolled in, just as I was leaving Jared's garage after a routine oil check. The rain came down in torrents, the wind howling as lightning lit up the sky. Jared insisted on driving me home, his tone firm despite my protests. The drive was tense, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. When we reached the house, the rain was still pouring down, and he offered to wait with me until the worst of the storm had passed. I agreed, more out of a desire to stay in his presence than any real fear of the weather. We settled in the living room, the soft glow of the lamps casting a warm light over the room as the storm raged outside. We talked about simple things at first, his plans to open his own garage someday, his favorite travel spots, and his memories from childhood. I found myself laughing at his stories, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in years, a sense of ease that had been missing from my life for too long. But as the evening wore on, the conversation took a more serious turn. He spoke about his struggles, the pressures he faced as a young man trying to make a name for himself. I listened, offering encouragement and understanding, feeling a deep connection as he shared pieces of himself he hadn't revealed before. "Vivian," he said quietly after a pause, his gaze searching mine. "Do you ever feel trapped? Like there's a part of you that's still waiting for something?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to answer. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw a vulnerability there, a raw honesty that made it impossible to lie. "Yes," I admitted softly, my voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "I do." The admission hung between us, a confession that neither of us had expected, but both seemed to understand. In that moment, something shifted. A silent acknowledgement that we were both searching for something that went beyond the ordinary boundaries of our lives. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand resting on his. He looked at me, his eyes dark with an emotion that I couldn't quite name, and I felt the pull between us, the magnetic force that had been building for so long. It was reckless, it was wrong, but in that moment, it felt like the only choice I could make. He leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that was both gentle and filled with a depth of feeling I hadn't experienced in years. It was as though he had unlocked a part of me that I'd kept hidden away, a part that had been waiting for this moment, this connection. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and flushed, I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear, a realization that we had crossed a line that could never be redrawn. But as he held me close, I knew that I couldn't bring myself to regret it. After that night, everything changed. We tried to keep our distance, to avoid the temptation that lingered between us, but it was impossible. Each time I saw him, each time I heard his voice, I felt the same pull, the same magnetic force that seemed to draw us together, no matter how hard we tried to resist. We began meeting in secret, stealing moments whenever we could. In the quiet of his garage, in the hidden corners of town, we created a world of our own, a world where the rules and expectations of society didn't matter. In those stolen moments, I found a freedom I hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging that had been missing from my life for far too long. But with each meeting, the guilt grew. Gerald, oblivious as ever, continued his work and travel routines, unaware of the secret life I was leading. The deception weighed on me, a constant reminder of the boundaries I had broken, the trust I had betrayed. One afternoon, as I lay in Jared's arms, the weight of it all became too much. I pulled away, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what we were risking. "Jared," I said, my voice trembling, "we can't keep doing this. It's not fair to anyone." He looked at me, his expression filled with both understanding and pain. "I know," he replied softly, "but I can't help how I feel about you, Vivian. You're everything to me." The words cut through me, a bittersweet reminder of the love we had found and the impossibility of our situation. I wanted to tell him that I felt the same, that he had awakened something in me that I hadn't even known was there. But the reality was undeniable. We couldn't continue down this path without hurting everyone we cared about. For the first time, I felt the full weight of the choices we had made, the consequences that loomed just beyond the edges of our secret world. But even as I pulled away, even as I tried to end things, I knew that it was already too late. We had crossed a line that could never be undone, and no matter how hard we tried to deny it, our lives would never be the same. The days passed, each one seeming longer than the last. The quiet moments I had once found comfort in now felt hollow, marked by an emptiness that seemed to grow with each passing hour. I would catch myself drifting off in thought, my mind wandering back to Jared, to the warmth of his embrace and the tenderness in his gaze. And each time the guilt would surge anew, a constant reminder of the lines we had crossed. Yet, no matter how much I tried to distance myself, to resist the pull, the truth remained. Jared had become a part of me, a part that I couldn't easily let go. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Gerald entered the kitchen, a faint smile on his face. He looked relaxed, his usual stern expression softened, and he came up behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Vivian," he began, his voice warm, "I've been meaning to tell you. I've decided to take a few weeks off. I know I've been away a lot lately, and I think it's time I made more of an effort here." I froze, the knife slipping from my hand as his words sank in. Gerald's decision to stay meant more time together, more eyes watching, more chances for him to notice the subtle changes in me that I'd tried so hard to hide. "That's wonderful, Gerald," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'm sure it'll be good for us both." But inside, I felt a surge of panic. The walls of our home suddenly feeling closer, the weight of the secret I shared with Jared pressing down on me like a suffocating fog. As the days passed, I found it harder and harder to steal moments with Jared, to find those precious, hidden spaces where we could be ourselves without fear of discovery. One afternoon, while Gerald was out running errands, I met Jared in his garage, our usual sanctuary, now charged with a new level of tension. I could see the worry etched in his features, the unspoken question lingering between us. "Vivian," he murmured, his voice laced with concern. Are you okay with all this? I mean, with him being around more?" I nodded, though the answer felt hollow. "I don't know, Jared. I thought I could handle it, but it's getting harder to keep pretending." He reached out, his hand warm against mine, and I felt the familiar surge of comfort that his touch brought. "I know," he said softly, "but I don't want you to feel trapped. If this is too much, if it's hurting you, we can—" I shook my head, stopping him. "No, I don't want to end this, Jared. I can't. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Our words hung in the air, a shared truth that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. The reality was becoming clearer with each passing day. Our secret was a fragile thing, one that could shatter at any moment, taking us both down with it. Our world, once hidden and secure, began to show cracks as Gerald's presence became more constant, more observant. I could feel his gaze lingering on me longer than usual, his questions more probing, his affection more attentive. It was as though he sensed the change in me, though he couldn't yet name it, and the thought sent a chill through me. Then there was Clara, an old family friend who had known Gerald for years. Clara was a sharp, perceptive woman, one who rarely missed even the smallest detail. She visited one afternoon, her usual cheerful demeanor masking a subtle intensity as she watched me, her gaze lingering on my every movement. She asked about Gerald, about his sudden decision to spend more time at home, her questions casual yet laced with an underlying curiosity that made me uneasy. As the afternoon wore on, Clara's questions grew bolder, more pointed, until finally she leaned in, her voice lowered. "Vivian," she said, a knowing look in her eyes, "is there something going on between you and someone else?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I felt the ground shift beneath me. I forced a laugh, trying to dismiss her words, but the suspicion in her gaze remained, a silent warning that she had seen more than I realized. "I don't know what you mean, Clara," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. She smiled, but there was a hardness to it, a hint of judgment that made my heart pound. "Just be careful, Vivian. Sometimes, secrets have a way of coming to light when we least expect it." As Clara left, her words echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the danger we were facing. I knew then that our time was running out, that our secret was a fragile thing, teetering on the edge of discovery. That evening, I met Jared in the garage, the tension between us sharper, more desperate than ever before. I could see the worry in his eyes, the uncertainty that mirrored my own, and I knew that we were standing on the brink of something we could never undo. "Vivian," he began, his voice tight with emotion. Maybe it's time to end this. Before it's too late." The words cut through me like a knife, a sharp reminder of the reality we'd tried so hard to ignore. But even as he spoke, I could see the pain in his eyes, the reluctance in his voice, and I knew that he didn't want to end things any more than I did. "I don't want to lose you, Jared," I whispered, my voice breaking. "But I don't know how to keep going like this." He pulled me into his arms, his embrace a mixture of comfort and desperation, and I felt the familiar warmth of his touch, the steady beat of his heart against mine. In that moment, I knew that no matter how much we tried to deny it, our connection was something we couldn't escape, a bond that had grown stronger with each secret meeting, each stolen kiss. But even as we clung to each other, I felt the weight of our situation pressing down on me, a constant reminder of the consequences we could no longer ignore. We had built our world on borrowed time, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before it came crashing down. One evening, as I was driving home from an errand, lost in thought, the unexpected happened. A car came speeding around a corner, the headlights blinding as it swerved into my lane. I barely had time to react, slamming on the brakes as the impact sent my car spinning off the road, my body jolting with the force of the crash. When I opened my eyes, I was dazed, my head throbbing as I took in the twisted metal around me. My phone had been flung somewhere in the impact, leaving me stranded, alone in the dark, with only the faint hum of the nearby road to break the silence. I reached for the only person I knew would come, Jared. He answered on the first ring, his voice filled with concern as I explained the accident, my voice shaking as I fought to stay calm. He arrived within minutes, his face pale as he helped me from the car, his hands gentle but firm as he guided me to the passenger seat of his truck. As we drove in silence, the reality of our situation hit me. The fear of losing everything we'd built, the knowledge that we could no longer pretend. "Jared," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We can't keep living like this. It's time to make a choice." He looked at me, his expression filled with both love and pain, and I knew that he felt the same. Our love, as strong and beautiful as it was, had become a burden, a weight that we could no longer carry alone. "I understand, Vivian," he replied softly, his voice filled with a quiet resignation. "But whatever happens, know that I'll always be here for you, no matter what." In the days that followed, I knew that the time had come to say goodbye. The accident had been a wake-up call, a reminder of the fragility of our lives and the consequences of our choices. Jared and I met one last time, our parting filled with both sadness and gratitude for the love we had shared. As I returned to my life with Gerald, I felt a sense of closure, a quiet acceptance of the choices I had made and the love I had found and lost. I knew that Jared would always hold a place in my heart, a memory that I would carry with me. But I also knew that it was time to let go, to find peace in the life I had chosen. Each day, I found new strength, a renewed commitment to the life I had rebuilt, the family I had reclaimed. And though the memory of Jared remained, a soft ache that would never fully fade, I knew that I had made the right choice, a choice that had brought me both love and loss, but also a deeper understanding of myself. When I bent down to pick up the book I'd dropped on the floor, I felt his presence before I saw him. Turning my head, I caught Liam standing there, his eyes fixed on me, and the way he looked at me made my breath catch. The moment was so brief, yet it felt like the room itself shifted. I had been cleaning the living room, humming absent-mindedly to the sound of the radio, when I accidentally knocked over one of my husband's old novels. The book had fallen just beneath the coffee table, and I crouched down, slipping my arm underneath to grab it. It was an ordinary movement in an ordinary day, until it wasn't. When I turned to see him standing in the doorway, I froze. Liam, my stepson, wasn't supposed to be home yet. He had mentioned heading out earlier that morning, camera slung over his shoulder as he rambled about finding the perfect light for his next project. Yet there he was, leaning against the frame of the doorway, his gaze fixed on me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. I noticed the stillness in the air, the kind that makes your pulse quicken for no reason at all. Liam didn't say a word, but his eyes lingered longer than they should have. It wasn't the kind of look you'd expect from your husband's son. No, this felt different. Something unspoken passed between us in that brief, uncomfortable silence. I stood up quickly, clutching the book to my chest as if it were some kind of shield. My cheeks burned, though I wasn't sure why. "I didn't hear you come in," I said, my voice faltering. He shrugged, but there was something unreadable in his expression. "Didn't mean to startle you," he replied, his tone casual, though his eyes betrayed him. The moment passed as quickly as it had come. Liam walked off toward the kitchen, leaving me standing there in the middle of the living room, gripping the book as though it might anchor me back to reality. I could hear him rummaging through the fridge, the mundane sounds grounding me just enough to shake off the haze of what had just happened. But the moment stuck with me. It played on a loop in my mind as I went about the rest of my chores. I caught myself staring into the mirror longer than usual that afternoon, scrutinizing my appearance in a way I hadn't in years. At 56, I had long since grown comfortable in my own skin, or so I thought. But now, a single glance from Liam had made me question everything. The distance in my marriage, my role in this family, and why, for the first time in years, I felt seen. I told myself I was imagining it, that the look in his eyes wasn't what it seemed, and that my reaction was nothing more than a symptom of boredom or loneliness. But even as I tried to convince myself, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered otherwise. Looking back, I should have known that moment would change everything. But at the time, I didn't see it coming. Not the tension, not the feelings, and certainly not the consequences. It started with small things. Subtle changes that I convinced myself didn't mean anything. After that moment in the living room, I couldn't stop replaying the way Liam had looked at me. It was as if he had seen me for the first time. Not as his father's wife, not as the woman who had stepped into his life when he was a teenager, but as something else. And maybe, just maybe, I hadn't entirely hated it. I tried to push it aside, telling myself it was my imagination running wild. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more those moments seemed to find me. The next one came just a few days later. I was making lunch, a quiet Saturday when my husband Richard had left early for a golf outing. I'd barely noticed Liam come into the kitchen until I turned around and found him standing closer than I expected. He was reaching for a glass in the cupboard above me, and for a moment, we were so close I could feel the warmth of his body. "Sorry," he murmured, stepping back just slightly. But his voice had a low, almost intimate edge to it, like an afterthought. I laughed nervously, brushing past him as I grabbed a cutting board. "No problem," I said, but my hands trembled slightly as I chopped the vegetables for the salad. It was ridiculous how aware of him I had become, his movements, his presence, even the way he smelled faintly of cedarwood and something earthy. I chastised myself for noticing. He was just being polite, just helping himself to a glass of water. Nothing more. But then there was the way his eyes lingered when I spoke. The way his arm brushed against mine a little too often when we shared a small space. And the way he seemed to find excuses to be around me. I wasn't imagining it. At least, that's what I told myself as the days went on. One evening, about a week after that first moment in the living room, I found myself sitting on the back patio with a glass of wine. Richard was away again, this time on a business trip. He traveled often, leaving the house eerily quiet at night. Liam had been out for most of the day, but I heard the faint sound of the sliding glass door opening behind me. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him standing there with a beer in hand. He wasn't wearing a shirt, just a pair of gray sweatpants that hung low on his hips. The sight of him startled me. How grown he looked, how completely different from the boy I had met years ago. Of course not, I said, forcing a smile and gesturing to the chair next to me. He sat down, and for a while, we just sat there in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It should have been peaceful, but I felt anything but calm. The air between us felt heavy, charged with something I didn't want to name. "You seem different lately," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, but his words caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I sipped my wine. "I don't know, just quieter. Like you're lost in thought a lot," he said, glancing at me with those dark eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated. What was I supposed to say? That I'd been thinking about him far more than I should? That every time he was near, I felt like I was balancing on the edge of something dangerous? "I'm fine," I said finally. "Just busy, I guess." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't entirely believe me. "You know, if you ever need someone to talk to." He let the sentence trail off, his voice laced with a sincerity that made my chest ache. "I'll keep that in mind," I replied, offering him a small smile. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, but the tension between us remained. When I went to bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at me again. The way he had seemed so attuned to my mood, to my emotions. It wasn't just my imagination anymore. Something was shifting between us, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could ignore it. The tipping point came on a rainy afternoon the following week. Richard was still out of town, and I had decided to spend the day reorganizing the storage closet in the hallway. It was tedious work, and I didn't notice Liam standing behind me until I felt his hand on my shoulder. I jumped slightly, startled. "You scared me," I said, laughing nervously as I turned to face him. "Sorry," he said, smiling faintly. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you." His hand lingered on my shoulder for a moment longer than necessary before he pulled it away. "Do you need any help?" he asked, his voice low and warm. I shook my head. "No, I've got it, but thanks." He didn't leave, though. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, watching me as I sorted through a box of old photographs. I felt his gaze on me, heavy and unwavering, and it made my hands tremble slightly as I worked. "You were really beautiful back then," he said suddenly, gesturing to a photo I had just pulled out of the box. It was an old picture of me in my 20s, smiling at the camera in a sundress. I felt my cheeks flush. "Thank you," I said softly, setting the photo aside. "You still are," he added, his voice quieter this time. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. The silence stretched between us, thick and almost unbearable. When I finally dared to look at him, the intensity in his eyes took my breath away. It wasn't just admiration, it was something deeper, something that made my pulse race and my stomach flip. I knew I should have said something, should have stopped whatever this was before it went any further. But I didn't. And that was the moment I knew I was in trouble. It happened late one night, a moment I hadn't planned for and one I'd spend countless hours afterward trying to rationalize. But deep down, I knew there was no rationale for what we did. Only raw emotion, desire, and the weight of everything we weren't supposed to feel. The house was quiet. Richard had called earlier to let me know he'd be extending his trip by another few days. By then, I had grown used to his absences, even welcomed the silence they brought. But that night, the silence felt heavy, like a presence in itself. I poured myself another glass of wine and sat on the couch, letting the faint glow of the television light up the otherwise dark room. I didn't expect to hear footsteps behind me. When I turned, I saw Liam standing at the edge of the living room, his hair damp from the shower, a plain t-shirt clinging to his chest. He held a mug in his hand, but his eyes were on me. "You're up late," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He shrugged, stepping further into the room. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd make some tea." "Good idea," I murmured, turning my attention back to the screen. But I could feel him watching me, the weight of his presence impossible to ignore. Instead of going back to his room, Liam crossed the room and sat on the couch, just a few feet away from me. The space between us felt smaller than it should have. For a while, Neither of us spoke. The low hum of the TV filling the room. I could feel his body heat, his closeness amplifying the tension that had been building between us for weeks. "What are you watching?" he asked, breaking the silence. I glanced at the screen, realizing I hadn't been paying attention. "Some old movie," I said. "Nothing special." He smiled faintly, his gaze lingering on me in a way that made my pulse quicken. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, his voice low. I froze, the words hitting me like a jolt of electricity. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. Instead, I looked down at the glass in my hands, my heart pounding so loudly, I was certain he could hear it. "You don't have to pretend you didn't hear me," he said after a moment. "I meant it." "Liam," I began, my voice shaky. "You can't." "Why not?" he interrupted gently, leaning forward. "You think I haven't noticed the way you've been looking at me, or the way I can't stop thinking about you?" I opened my mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. I had been looking at him, thinking about him, wanting him in ways I couldn't admit, not even to myself. And now, sitting so close to him in the dim light of the living room, I felt the walls I had carefully built around my emotions beginning to crumble. This isn't right," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "But it doesn't feel wrong, does it?" he asked, his voice soft but insistent. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, the rest of the world seemed to disappear. I don't know who moved first, whether it was me or him, but the next thing I knew, his lips were on mine, warm and urgent. I should have pulled away. I should have stopped it. But I didn't. Instead, I kissed him back, my hands trembling as they found their way to his shoulders. The kiss deepened, the air around us thick with unspoken need. When he pulled back, his forehead resting against mine, I could see the conflict in his eyes. But there was something else there too, something that mirrored the way I felt. "Evelyn," he murmured, his voice breaking the silence. Hearing him say my name like that with so much tenderness made my resolve falter even further. I didn't say anything, because I didn't trust myself to speak. Instead, I stood up, my hands trembling as I set my wine glass on the coffee table. Without a word, I walked out of the living room and up the stairs, my heart racing with every step. But I didn't go to my bedroom. Instead, I stopped outside the guest room Liam had been staying in since he moved back home. For a long moment, I just stood there, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I should have gone to bed, shut the door, and pretended none of it had happened. But I didn't. That night marked the beginning of something we couldn't undo. It wasn't just about the physical connection, though that was undeniable. It was the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt wanted, seen. And it was intoxicating. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and whispered confessions. We were careful at first, meeting late at night when Richard was out, or sneaking glances across the room when we thought no one was watching. Each touch, each kiss, felt like a secret only we could share. One afternoon, we found ourselves alone again. I had been in the kitchen, cleaning up after lunch, when Liam walked in. The sun streaming through the window cast a warm glow over the room, but the tension between us made the air feel heavy. He stood behind me, his presence undeniable. I could feel the heat of his body, even though he didn't touch me. "Evelyn," he said softly, his voice sending a shiver down my spine. I turned to face him, my breath catching when I saw the way he was looking at me. Before I could say anything, he closed the distance between us, his hands finding my waist as he kissed me with a hunger that took my breath away. We began finding more excuses to be alone. A quiet walk around the neighborhood. An afternoon trip to the farmer's market, where we pretended to be nothing more than a stepmother and stepson running errands. But every touch, every glance, told a different story. It wasn't long before the secrecy became a thrill in itself. We met in places we shouldn't have. An empty guest room at a family gathering, the backseat of his car parked in a secluded spot by the lake. Each moment was a risk, but that was part of what made it so intoxicating. But with every stolen moment, the reality of our situation loomed over us. We were playing with fire, and we both knew it. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long we could keep it up before everything came crashing down. And yet, even as the guilt gnawed at me, I couldn't bring myself to stop, because what we had, What Liam and I shared was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just desire, it was connection, understanding, and something I didn't dare call love, at least, not yet. For weeks, Liam and I danced on the edge of discovery. Every glance across the room, every fleeting touch when no one was looking, felt like a risk. But the thrill of it, the danger, only made it harder to stop. I tried to act normal around Richard, as if nothing had changed, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up the charade. Every moment with Liam chipped away at my carefully constructed facade. It wasn't just the fear of being caught that made things complicated. There was a shift in Liam, too. At first he seemed content with our stolen moments, but as the weeks went on, I began to sense a restlessness in him. He wanted more, though he never said it outright. It was in the way he lingered when we said goodbye, the way he looked at me like he was trying to memorize every detail of my face. One evening, things came to a head. Richard had returned from his trip, and the three of us were sitting in the living room after dinner. Richard was flipping through the channels, barely paying attention to the conversation. Liam was seated across from me, and I could feel his eyes on me, even as I tried to avoid looking at him. "Liam," Richard said, breaking the silence, "how's the photography work going?" "I've been meaning to ask." "It's going well," Liam replied, his voice steady, though I could hear the underlying tension. "I've been working on a series for a client, portraits mostly." "That's great," Richard said, nodding. "You should show us some of your work sometime." Liam glanced at me, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "Maybe I will," he said, his tone measured. The conversation moved on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Liam was holding something back. Later that night, after Richard had gone to bed, I found Liam sitting on the back patio, a cigarette in hand. He rarely smoked, and seeing him like that made my chest tighten. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked softly as I stepped outside. He looked up at me, his eyes dark and tired. "Something like that." I hesitated for a moment before sitting down beside him. The air was cool, and the faint scent of smoke lingered between us. "What's wrong?" I asked. He took a drag from his cigarette, exhaling slowly before he spoke. "I hate this," he said, his voice low. "Hiding, pretending like there's nothing going on." I felt a pang of guilt at his words. "Liam, we don't have a choice, you know that." He turned to look at me, his gaze intense. "But what if we did? What if we stopped pretending?" I didn't know how to respond. The idea of being honest, of laying everything bare, was terrifying. I couldn't imagine what would happen if Richard found out, or if anyone else did. The fallout would be catastrophic. "We can't," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's not that simple." He shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "It never is with you, is it?" The words stung, but I couldn't blame him for feeling that way. He stood up, flicking his cigarette into the ashtray before walking back inside, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The tension between us only grew after that night. Liam became more distant, his frustration evident in the way he avoided me when we weren't alone. It hurt, but I knew he was right to be angry. I had been the one to start this, the one to cross the line, and now I was the one holding us back. Things took an unexpected turn when Claire, my best friend, came to visit. Claire had been a part of my life for years, and she had a knack for noticing things most people wouldn't. The moment she stepped into the house, I felt a wave of anxiety. I hadn't told her anything about Liam, of course, but I couldn't shake the fear that she might pick up on something. "You've been quiet lately," she said over coffee one morning. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as strained as it felt. "I'm fine, just a lot on my mind." Claire narrowed her eyes at me, her expression skeptical. "You know you can talk to me, right? If something's going on." "Of course," I said quickly. "It's nothing really." She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. Still, her presence added another layer of tension to an already fragile situation. Liam was careful around her, keeping his distance whenever she was in the room. But I noticed the way he looked at me when he thought no one was watching. The same way he always did. Things came to a boiling point one evening when Liam and I were alone in the kitchen. Claire and Richard had gone out for a drink, leaving the house quiet, except for the sound of the rain outside. I was washing dishes when I felt Liam's presence behind me. "Evelyn?" he said softly, his voice sending a shiver down my spine. I turned to face him, my hands still wet from the sink. What is it? He hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. I can't do this anymore, he said, his voice trembling. I can't keep pretending like this doesn't mean anything. It does mean something, I said, my voice breaking. You know it does. Then why are we still hiding? He asked, his frustration evident. Why can't we just be honest about what we feel? Because it would destroy everything, I said, my chest tightening. Do you really think Richard would just accept this? Do you think anyone would? I don't care what anyone thinks, he said, his voice rising. I care about you. His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I felt my resolve crumbling, the weight of everything we had been hiding threatening to crush me. But before I could respond, the sound of the front door opening broke the moment. Richard and Claire were back, their laughter echoing through the hallway. Liam stepped back, his expression a mixture of anger and longing. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the sound of my racing heartbeat. It was later that week when the first real complication arose. Liam had been working on a photography project for a local gallery, and one of his subjects, a woman named Julia, had taken a particular interest in him. I didn't know much about her, but the way he talked about her made me uneasy. I couldn't tell if it was jealousy or something else, but I felt a knot in my stomach every time her name came up. Then, one evening, Liam mentioned that Julia had invited him to a gallery opening. You should come, he said casually, though his eyes betrayed a hint of something more. I hesitated, unsure if it was a good idea. But part of me wanted to see who this woman was and what she meant to him. The gallery opening was beautiful, filled with people milling about and admiring the art. Julia was charming, with a sharp wit and an easy laugh that made me feel instantly out of place. She greeted Liam warmly, her hand lingering on his arm just a little too long. I tried to focus on the art, but my attention kept drifting back to them. Liam caught my eye more than once, his expression unreadable. By the end of the night, I felt more conflicted than ever. The lines between us were blurring, and I wasn't sure how much longer we could keep walking this tightrope without falling. The gallery opening was the beginning of the unraveling. I didn't know it at the time, but that night set in motion events that would change everything. As much as I tried to brush off my discomfort, the image of Liam and Julia laughing together haunted me. It wasn't just jealousy, it was the realization that this wasn't sustainable. The secrecy, the tension, the stolen moments, it all felt like a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. But it wasn't jealousy or guilt that ultimately tipped the scales. It was something much darker. A week later, the first sign of trouble appeared. It started with a knock at the door, unexpected and urgent. I was alone at the time. Richard was at work, and Liam had gone out to run errands. When I opened the door, I found a man standing there, his expression cold and unreadable. He was dressed plainly, jeans, a jacket, but there was something about him that sent a chill down my spine. Mrs. Clark? He asked, his voice firm. Yes, I replied, my heart pounding. Can I help you? I'm Detective Marcus Hayes, he said, pulling out a badge. I'm investigating a case that may involve someone in your household. Would you mind answering a few questions? My stomach dropped. What kind of case? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. It's regarding a series of incidents in the area, he said vaguely. I'd prefer to discuss it in private. I hesitated before stepping aside to let him in. He sat at the dining table, pulling out a notebook. I understand your stepson Liam is staying here? Yes, I said cautiously. What's this about? He flipped through his notebook, his expression unreadable. Has he mentioned anyone by the name of Julia Baker? The name hit me like a slap. Julia? I repeated, my voice faltering. He knows her, yes? Why? She was found dead 2 nights ago, he said bluntly. We're trying to determine the circumstances surrounding her death. For a moment I couldn't speak. My mind raced, trying to process what he had just said. Dead? I managed to whisper. What happened? An apparent overdose, he said. But there are irregularities. Liam was seen with her the night before, and we're trying to piece together a timeline. I felt the blood drain from my face. Liam would never. He's not involved in something like this. I'm not accusing him, Hayes said calmly. I'm just gathering information. Can you tell me anything about his relationship with her? I shook my head. They worked together on his photography project. That's all I know. He nodded, scribbling something in his notebook. If you hear from him or remember anything that might help, please let me know. He left shortly after, but the weight of his visit lingered. When Liam returned home that evening, I confronted him immediately. Liam, I said, my voice sharp, we need to talk. He looked startled, setting down the bag of groceries he was carrying. What's wrong? A detective came by today, I said. He's investigating Julia's death. Liam's face paled. Julia's dead? Don't act like you didn't know, I snapped. They saw you with her the night before. What happened? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the kitchen. I didn't do anything, Evelyn. I swear. We went to the gallery together, had a few drinks, and then she went home. That's the last I saw her. Then why are they asking questions about you? I demanded. Is there something you're not telling me? He stopped pacing, turning to face me. I don't know, he said, his voice trembling. But I didn't hurt her. You have to believe me. I wanted to believe him. But the look in his eyes, part fear, part desperation, made me wonder if there was more to the story than he was letting on. Over the next few days, the tension in the house was unbearable. Liam avoided me, spending most of his time locked in his room. Richard noticed the change in him, but assumed it was related to his work. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of disaster. It wasn't until I found the camera that everything came crashing down. I had gone into Liam's room to grab some laundry, a mundane task I'd done countless times before. But when I saw the camera sitting on his desk, something compelled me to pick it up. The memory card was still inside, and before I could stop myself, I plugged it into my laptop. What I saw made my blood run cold. The photos were of Julia, taken the night of the gallery opening. At first, they seemed innocent, candid shots of her laughing, sipping her drink. But as I scrolled further, the images became darker. There was one of her passed out on a couch, her face pale and lifeless. Another showed Liam standing over her, his expression unreadable. I felt sick. My hands trembled as I closed the laptop, my mind racing. I didn't want to believe what I had just seen. But the evidence was undeniable. Liam had been there when Julia died, and he had documented it. When Liam came home that evening, I confronted him again, this time with the photos. What is this? I demanded, shoving the laptop toward him. He froze, his face a mask of panic. Where did you find that? That's not the point, I snapped. You were there, Liam. You saw her like that, and you didn't tell anyone. Why? He looked down, his shoulders slumping. I didn't know what to do, he said quietly. She overdosed right in front of me. I panicked. I didn't think anyone would believe me. So you took pictures instead of calling for help? I said, my voice rising. Do you realize how bad this looks? I didn't hurt her, he said, his voice desperate. I swear, Evelyn, I didn't touch her. I wanted to believe him, but the photos told a different story. And now I was caught in the middle of a nightmare I couldn't escape. The days that followed were a blur of fear and uncertainty. Detective Hayes returned, asking more questions about Liam. I lied, covering for him even as my doubts grew. I couldn't bring myself to turn him in. Not when I still wasn't sure of the truth, but the weight of what I was hiding was crushing me. Richard, oblivious to everything, continued on as if nothing was wrong. But I could see the cracks forming in our lives, the lies threatening to tear everything apart. Then, one night, everything came to a head. Liam came to me, his face pale and his hands shaking. They're coming for me, he said. I heard from a friend. Hayes has enough to arrest me. Liam, I began, but he cut me off. I need your help, he said. I can't do this alone. I didn't know what to say. The man I had fallen for, the man I thought I knew, was slipping through my fingers. And as much as I wanted to save him, I didn't know if I could. I stared at Liam, his face pale and pleading, and felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. He was asking for my help, asking me to risk everything to protect him, and the worst part was, I still didn't know if he was innocent. What do you want me to do? I asked, my voice shaking. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. I need to get out of here, he said. I can't wait around for them to arrest me. They'll twist everything, the photos, the fact that I didn't call the cops. I'll go to prison, Evelyn, and you know I didn't do anything wrong. You don't know that running will make it better, I said, my mind racing. If you leave, it'll only make you look guilty. Do you think they care whether I look guilty or not? He snapped, his voice breaking. They've already made up their minds. Hayes is just waiting for the right moment to pounce. I couldn't argue with him. Detective Hayes had been relentless, his questions cutting deeper with every visit. I'd done my best to shield Liam, but I knew it wasn't enough. The evidence was damning, and I couldn't deny the doubts creeping into my own mind. But then I looked at him, at the fear in his eyes, the desperation in his voice, and I knew I couldn't abandon him. No matter what he had or hadn't done, I couldn't walk away now. I was in this too deep. What's your plan? I asked finally, the words heavy on my tongue. The next 24 hours were a blur of frantic planning. Liam wanted to leave town, at least until things cooled down. I tried to convince him to stay, to face the accusations head-on, but he was adamant. I can't fight this from behind bars, he said. I need time to figure out my next move. I didn't know if I was making the right choice by helping him, but at that point, it didn't matter. My loyalty to him had already cost me too much, my peace of mind, my sense of morality, and whatever was left of my marriage. What was one more step down this dark path? That night, while Richard slept, I packed a bag for Liam and handed him some cash I'd stashed away for emergencies. Take this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You'll need it. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching mine. Thank you, he said softly. I'll make this right, I promise. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I watched as he slipped out the back door, the shadows swallowing him whole. And just like that, he was gone. The next morning, the consequences of my actions began to take shape. Detective Hayes arrived again, this time with a warrant. Richard was home, and the sight of the police at our doorstep sent him into a fury. What the hell is going on, Evelyn? He demanded as Hayes and his team searched the house. I don't know, I lied, my heart pounding. They're investigating Liam, something about that woman he worked with. Richard's face turned red with anger. And you didn't think to tell me. Jesus, Evelyn, what else are you hiding? I couldn't answer him. The guilt was suffocating, but I couldn't let it show. Not now. Hayes found the memory card Liam had left behind, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they pieced together what had happened. But they wouldn't find him. Not yet. And that gave me some small measure of relief. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension and suspicion. Richard became colder, his trust in me clearly shattered. I couldn't blame him. I had lied to his face, betrayed his family, and for what? A love I couldn't even define? A man who might not be who I thought he was? I spent most of my time alone, replaying everything that had happened in my mind. I thought about Liam, about the way he had looked at me that first night on the patio. I thought about Julia, about the photos and the questions they raised, and I thought about Hayes, who seemed to be closing in with every passing day. Then, one evening, the phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was before I even picked up. Evelyn. Liam's voice came through the line, low and urgent. I need your help. My heart skipped a beat. Liam, where are you? I can't tell you, he said. But I think I know who's behind all this. Julia was mixed up with someone dangerous. They're the ones who set me up. Who? I asked, my voice trembling. Liam, what are you talking about? I don't have time to explain, he said, but I need you to meet me. There's something I need to show you. Liam, please, he interrupted, his voice cracking. I can't do this without you. Against my better judgment, I agreed. He gave me a location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, and told me to come alone. Every instinct in my body screamed that this was a bad idea, but I couldn't turn him away. Not now. The warehouse was dark and empty, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. I found Liam waiting for me near the back, his face gaunt and tired. He was holding a folder, which he handed to me without a word. What is this? I asked, opening it. Inside were documents, photos, and emails, evidence that Julia had been involved in a blackmail scheme targeting wealthy clients of Liam's gallery. It was clear she had been working with someone else, though their identity wasn't immediately apparent. This proves I didn't kill her, Liam said. She was playing a dangerous game, and it caught up with her. But why did they frame you? I asked, my mind racing. Because I found out about it, he said. She told me everything that night, and someone didn't want me to talk. Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. My heart leapt into my throat as a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. It was Detective Hayes. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with smugness. "This is quite the little reunion." Liam tensed, stepping in front of me. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Hayes said, pulling out his gun. "You've been a thorn in my side for weeks, kid, but this ends now." Hayes found the memory card Liam had left behind, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they pieced together what had happened. But they wouldn't find him. Not yet, and that gave me some small measure of relief. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension and suspicion. Richard became colder, his trust in me clearly shattered. I couldn't blame him. I had lied to his face, betrayed his family, and for what? A love I couldn't even define? A man who might not be who I thought he was? I spent most of my time alone, replaying everything that had happened in my mind. I thought about Liam, about the way he had looked at me that first night on the patio. I thought about Julia, about the photos and the questions they raised. And I thought about Hayes, who seemed to be closing in with every passing day. Then, one evening, the phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was before I even picked up. "Evelyn?" Liam's voice came through the line, low and urgent. "I need your help." My heart skipped a beat. "Liam, where are you?" "I can't tell you," he said, "but I think I know who's behind all this. Julia was mixed up with someone dangerous. They're the ones who set me up." "Who?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Liam, what are you talking about?" "I don't have time to explain," he said, "but I need you to meet me. There's something I need to show you." "Liam, please," he interrupted, his voice cracking. "I can't do this without you." Against my better judgment, I agreed. He gave me a location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, and told me to come alone. Every instinct in my body screamed that this was a bad idea, but I couldn't turn him away. Not now. The warehouse was dark and empty, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. I found Liam waiting for me near the back, his face gaunt and tired. He was holding a folder, which he handed to me without a word. "What is this?" I asked, opening it. Inside were documents, photos, and emails, evidence that Julia had been involved in a blackmail scheme targeting wealthy clients of Liam's gallery. It was clear she had been working with someone else, though their identity wasn't immediately apparent. "This proves I didn't kill her," Liam said. "She was playing a dangerous game, and it caught up with her." "But why did they frame you?" I asked, my mind racing. "Because I found out about it," he said. "She told me everything that night, and someone didn't want me to talk." Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. My heart leapt into my throat as a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. It was Detective Hayes. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with smugness. "This is quite the little reunion." Liam tensed, stepping in front of me. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Hayes said, pulling out his gun. "You've been a thorn in my side for weeks, kid, but this ends now."